Hey leaders, in this episode of Leading Collaborative Response, Lorna and I trumpet the call that we believe passionately in. That is, schools need to stop tiering your kids. Once again, leaders, say it with me. Stop tiering your kids, tier your supports. However, we would also extend that further to say, stop tiering your adults. In this discussion, we break into what we mean by not tiering our adults and how the resources that we have available for us in the form of different adults and professionals within the building, how we can utilize them at various tiers of support within our continuum, and how simply seeing a person as a tiered support is a little bit misleading. Stop tiering your kids and stop tiering your adults. In this episode, we're going to discuss why that's critically important and what does it look like when we start truly tiering the supports for students within our collaborative response. So let's get started.
Are you a leader who is navigating the nuances of leading collaborative response in your school or district? Are you unsure of what collaborative response is? Are you looking to understand the critical role leadership plays when establishing and refining a collaborative response approach?
Collaborative response began as a grassroots approach to focus on the needs of students through a framework of collaboration. That approach has grown to a movement that is training leadership and education.
Through the Leading Collaborative Response podcast, Kurtis and I share our own experiences of leading collaborative response and lessons learned as we continue to learn and gain insight through the experiences of working alongside others. We also have the opportunity to engage in conversations with school and divisional leaders implementing the framework in their own organizations.
We know great leaders build great teams because that is what every child deserves. Subscribe to the Leading Collaborative Response podcast and join the thousands of schools seeing success for students through intentional and focused collaborative efforts. So this week, we want to focus in on the idea of our continuum of supports, and that we often share stop tiering your kids, tier the supports. But we also had an interesting revelation through conversation with some leaders recently regarding not only shouldn't we tier our students, but we probably shouldn't be tiering our adults either. Mm-hmm. Do you want to talk a little bit about, first off, the purpose of that continuum? How do we utilize a continuum of supports that's tiering the supports rather than the students?
Yeah, so we have to come to the essence of why we build a continuum in the first place. And the purpose of that is for us to articulate as adults in the building, what do we do to support the needs of our students? And we think about that in terms of different focus areas. So it might be behavior, it might be literacy, it might be numeracy.
So you're saying that in time, we could have a continuum developed for behavior, for literacy, for numeracy, multiple continuums potentially in our school over time.
Absolutely. So the purpose of doing that is not just to have a pretty poster or a nice PD activity, but rather articulate what it is that we do across our whole building to support the needs of our students in a particular area of need. And so it really is about making all of those supports clear, clearly defined, and easily accessed for anyone who is teaching or working in that building.
So we've talked before about how that we often refer to it as a placemat or a menu when we've got our continuum well established. It's really almost like a smorgasbord where we can be selecting what could we try, but that the supports become more intensified as it moves from what do we feel we will provide across every classroom for all students at Tier 1. Tier 2 are the things that I could be trying, but still within the locus of control of the classroom. Tier 3 becoming the supports provided by someone other than the teacher, but still within the school. And Tier 4 becoming the supports provided by someone external. So if we think about the supports in that way, you and I have often seen, and we've even done it, the idea of when we think about those different tiers, when we take specific individuals with expertise, let's use, for example, a speech language pathologist. Well, that's a person who's not located full-time in our school. The SLP must be a tier 4 support.
Yeah, so we see this often as especially when we get to tier 3 and tier 4, we start to name positions, or we name people who are responsible within that area, whether it's, the interventionist at the school in literacy belongs in tier 3, and then the external support that's coming in to help us. The SLP is a perfect example of what we're talking about today. So rather than putting those positions and putting the people on the continuum, we want to, and the same thing with students, we don't want students labeled that way either, but rather we look at what it is that those people do in our building to provide that support. So let's play out that idea of the speech language pathologist, because we often see this.
Yeah, who is an external person within our school. If we were
almost
tiering,
always,
not always, but if we were tiering the person, that's tier 4.
Yeah.
Okay, so walk us through how that might not be the case in some situations.
That certainly sounds like that's exactly the place that they belong. But when you think about what a speech language pathologist does for us,
we'll be right back to continue this episode.
When we establish continuums of support for our school focused on established priorities, we are answering the question of what will we do when faced with questions of how to support the needs of our students. But the creation of these continuums are only the first step. Join us for the online workshop, 10 Considerations When Utilizing and Refining Your Continuums of Support, part of our Supporting Collaborative Response series. In this on-demand workshop, I will share 5 ways to effectively utilize your continuum of supports within your school, and 5 ways to further refine your continuums to ensure maximum impact. I'll also be sharing numerous resources, templates, and samples. Access this on-demand workshop and you'll have the ability to view and replay all or any portion of the workshop when it best fits your time. Register today to learn more about refining and utilizing your continuum of supports, an integral part of a school's collaborative response.
And now back to our conversation.
When you think about what a speech language pathologist does for us, they come to our school and provide examples of how we can, especially in those early years, how we can design centers that allow us to explore speech in our classroom day to day.
So it could be that at tier 1, we have that we will, that we all agree that we will be using a play-based approach to language development.
That would
could be a tier 1 non-negotiable.
Speech-specific centers.
Right. So our SLP is helping us refine that tier 1 practice.
But that doesn't mean the SLP is leading those centers.
Correct. Okay, got it.
Okay. So it's something that's happening in the classroom. They've helped us to identify what that support is at tier 1. Okay. Tier 2, the speech language pathologist might be working with an SLPA, so a speech language assistant, or perhaps an educational assistant, and working on specific skills that a group of students need within the classroom.
Okay, so and if it's still in the classroom and a teacher is helping to guide that support, now we're still within that tier 2 realm.
Right.
Supports directed or guided by the teacher within the classroom.
And again, it's not the SLP that is actually conducting the support, but they are helping to inform what we're going to do within those small groups that we're working with around specific skills.
Now, I've had within my own school, taking that very same example, where the SLP might be working with an assistant to develop some additional supports for a individual student or a small cluster of students where they'll pull. This happened in my school before, where they pull to do some daily exercises that they had been guided to outside of the classroom. Now that's become a tier 3 level support, where it's still within the school being attended to, but now the classroom teacher is not necessarily guiding or directing that, or having it happen within the locus of the classroom.
That's right. Yeah. And then when we think about tier 4 and what are the areas of support that an SLP provides at that point, it usually turns to, so what are the gaps or the skills that this individual student needs? And it's looking at that one student to explore what are the areas of support that are required to help this student within their speech and language.
Right. So it might be, by tier 4, a specific speech intervention that is done more intensively by that external service provider. Right. They're leading that when coming into the school for some of our more intensive needs students. So really, in this particular example, that SLP, the speech language pathologist, is really informing and supporting strategies and interventions and accommodations at every one of our
all the way
tiers.
Through. And then when we look to our literacy continuum, then what we should see on that literacy continuum are the suggested strategies or small group intervention that is coming as suggested from the SLP, but not the SLP themselves.
So this is, and I just last week had the opportunity to speak with some external service providers, and we talked about in time being able to access a school's continuum to be able to essentially vet what's there, and are there additional strategies or accommodations or interventions they could be suggesting that we could be putting into our school. Okay, so I think one of the better examples that we also see too is the use of an educational assistant. So when we were back in a place of not understanding this to this depth, and we're tiering essentially our students, we would say, oh my goodness, the EA one-to-one support must be tier 4 because it's the most intensive support. It's quite expensive when we're putting one adult body to one student for a direct one-to-one. It must be the highest level of support that we can provide. So it made sense when we were tiering the students. But when we tier the supports, again, that EA may be at different levels. So for instance, if that educational assistant is working with a student or even a small cohort of students during core instruction, but under the guidance of the classroom teacher, meaning classroom teacher has said, I'd like for you to be doing this during this time to help support. Well, this is again where we're accessing that educational assistance support at a tier 2 level. But then we also, within our school, would have times where students would come out for additional reading practice. We had a couple of EAs that were trained in reading recovery at that point, or some other literacy interventions. It was our learning support teacher that was establishing that. That again was now our EA being utilized as a tier 3 level support as well. So I think tiering the supports is really the clear message that we're trying to get to, not tiering the students, or as we've talked about today, the adults.
And I'll always turn to that thinking about jagged profiles. And we always talk about students having jagged profiles, and that we don't put them into a tier because there are strengths and there are challenges for every student, depending on who they are and their circumstances. But I would say that that's true too when you think about your own role in your school, that that also is true, that you are not serving one particular area, but rather your position allows you to flex and move according to where you're needed and where that support is required, which means that you probably serve students all the way across the continuum.
So with that, we hope we've shared out some further ideas to help further understand and now possibly go back to your own continuums to make any adjustments. we'll include in the resources areas that we send out, and of course the YouTube description, some additional resources, including a video that describes what is a continuum of support. That's a great one to be able to share with staff, and some other overview documents that may be valuable as well. We always encourage you to reach out if you have questions, or if you'd like to be able to discuss this further, or even share some examples from your own.
Yeah, we'd love to hear.
All right. With that, we wish everyone the best and take care.
See you soon.
For more on collaborative response, visit jigsawlearning.ca or join the JL Insider to receive access to newly added resources and content. Make sure to follow us on social media. Subscribe to the podcast and the Jigsaw Learning YouTube channel to access past and upcoming episodes. Join us again to continue to build your own capacity and leading collaborative response in your context.